In Limbus Company, the two parts of a team are identities and ego. And while most identities are specialized for certain team compositions, many ego skills can be found in a lot of teams, regardless of what the team is centered around. In fact, some teams exist solely to buff select ego skills to their maximum potential. But not all egos are created equally. Some are far better than others. Today I want to spend some time to figure out what is the best ego skill in Limbus Company. I will mostly take the power of the ego at threat spin 3 into consideration, while mentioning threat spin 4 whenever it provides a large upgrade. Beware, as the video will be entirely based on my opinion, and you might not agree with the things I say. If that is the case, I recommend you leave your thoughts in the comments below, so that others can see your point of view. Without further ado, let's get started. First of all, I want to divide egos into three categories, as many of them serve different purposes entirely, and comparing them between each other would be pointless. The first category will be damage. This is, as you could imagine, a category of ego skills that exist to deal high amounts of damage. Then we have recovery. This category of ego skills focuses on healing your team's HP or SP above all else. The last category is support, and support egos focus on neither damage nor healing, instead buffing allies or debuffing enemies. At the end of the video, every category will have one ego above the rest, but we won't be comparing egos from different categories between each other. Now let's start with the damage category. There are two types of ego skills that deal high damage, those which target one enemy and those which have high attack weight. Keep that in mind, as these two types of skills have different strengths and weaknesses, meaning that in certain cases a generally weaker ego can do more than one that I would rank above it. Starting off, I want to introduce the contenders for the spot of the best damage ego. We have Yi-Sang's Dimension Shredder, Faust's Everlasting, Josh's Red Eyes Open, Force Mage Flame and Contempt Awe, and Otis's Dimension Shredder. These are the ego skills that have abilities that increase their power or damage, and thus deal the most damage out of all the egos when used. There are others, however, if they're not in this selection, that is because I've deemed them to be less useful than the ones mentioned. We'll start dissecting the egos in order, beginning with Yi-Sang's Dimension Shredder. This ego skill has a max power of 38 and an attack weight of 1. To compensate for this low attack weight, Shredder has two damage multipliers within its kit. Before attack, charge count is spent to raise the damage by up to 75%. Then, on hit, an additional burst of damage is applied as sprite damage calculated by rupture potency times 10% of damage dealt, up to 100%. This means that the maximum amount of damage Yi-Sang's Dimension Shredder can do to an enemy that is neutral to both Pierce and Pride is 133, with half of the damage being true Pride damage, and thus not being affected by the enemy's Pierce resistance. Something I have to mention is that at Threat Spin 4 the second buff is changed from up to 100% to up to 100, which is probably a typo, but if that is the case, this increases the base damage to 166, while actively decreasing the damage against enemies that are weak to Pierce and or Pride. As for the accessibility of Shredder's potential, it's fairly easy to get it to its full damage when using Warp Crop Yi-Sang. He naturally produces charge and rupture, and only requires help with the setup of rupture potency on the enemy to hit for max damage. Next up we have Faust's Everlasting. This is the only 4-coin ego in the game, and that works in this skill's favor when talking about damage. Everlasting has a max power of 24 with the attack weight of 1. The way this ego deals damage is through Tremor, with a side of damage buffing through speed. By inflicting Entanglement into Everlasting on an enemy that is already inflicted with Tremor Reverb, Everlasting's 4 coins can cause a lot of Tremor bursts, which deal damage due to the effects of Reverb. At Threat Spin 3, this skill can cause up to 9 bursts, and that increases to 12 at Threat Spin 4. At max Tremor potency, when hitting a neutral enemy with all buffs active, Everlasting at Threat Spin 3 can deal up to 980 damage. This might seem like an insane amount of damage, which would easily put Faust ahead of everyone in this competition. However, the cap for additional burst chance for Tremor Everlasting is set at 50%, meaning that to deal this much damage you have to luck out on 6 50-50 chances, which has a 1.5 probability of happening. Certainly, it's not impossible, but you could never rely on the skill to give you the maximum damage all the time. Not to mention that this calculation presumes that you have over 50 tremor count and 99 tremor potency, which isn't something achievable outside of mirror dungeons. You also require a previous hit from Cavernous Wailing to set up reverb for all this damage. This gargantuan amount of setup makes such high damage borderline impossible in any actually difficult part of the game, thus disqualifying Everlasting from the competition. Next up we have the Season 1 classic Roshu's Force Match Flame. This ego will be entirely judged on its Red Spin 4 variant, as without it this skill lacks most of its damage. Force Match Flame has a max power of 37, with the attack weight of 3. It gains 2 additional power against targets with burn, making its power 39. Despite already looking solid as a 39 power mass attack, Roshu's Flame actually deals plus 5% damage per 1 burn on target up to 100%. Against 3 neutral targets with 20 burn each, Force Match Flame deals 234 damage. The conditions for the skill aren't that difficult to fulfill, however inflicting 20 burn to 3 different targets at once takes a fair bit of time, making this ego less desirable. It also kind of struggles when hitting just one enemy, as the final damage is cut down to 1/3 of my calculation, or just 78 damage. Roshu's second entry on this list is Red Eyes Open. This skill has 30 max power and 3 attack weight. Similarly to Force Match Flame, it can also raise its power with conditions, up to 37. Against targets with bind, this ego deals 40% more damage, meaning to 3 neutral targets with 3 bind, and the power buff, Red Eyes Open deals 155 damage. This might seem like a strictly worse version of Force Match Flame. However, as Red Spin 4 Teth Red Eyes can set up a full power Red Eyes Open next turn, meaning that unlike Flame, this ego is pretty consistent in its output. Roshu's third and last entry is Contempt Awe. This is a 2-coin wall level ego that has 20 max power at Red Spin 3, with a base weight of 1, which can be upgraded to 5 weight at Red Spin 3. Contempt Awe deals great damage whenever you create a lone resonance chain. The attack weight and damage bonus are both calculated using the highest resonance, and with both being at their full effect, when this ego is used against a group of neutral enemies, it can deal 289 damage. This is another ego where Red Spin 4 really matters, as it improves a lot of this ego's aspects. The total power is raised by 4, the max weight is raised by 2, the damage buff is active for an additional turn, and the ego receives an additional ability that allows it to replenish ego materials when used in a last chain. The overall damage is now raised to 478 damage outside of a last chain. I have to mention that this calculation takes the full 7 weight as targeting 7 enemies, even though it's impossible in the game as of right now. However, with the new incentive to use Contempt Awe in a last chain, the additional damage can come from that, so this calculation should still be close to reality. Contempt Awe requires setup only within 1 turn, making it easy to use in teams that get a lot of resonance naturally. Building a last team to improve this ego is also possible due to its great damage output when put into a last chain. The last contender of the damage category is once again Dimension Shredder, this time belonging to Otis. This ego skill has a power of 30 and a weight of 3, but that weight can be increased to 4 at Red Spin 3. The damage of the Shredder comes from consuming charge count to increase the damage output by up to 20% at Red Spin 3. For now, the calculation is pretty simple. With the weight buff active and maximum buffs from the charge count, when hitting 4 neutral targets, Dimension Shredder deals 144 damage. This ego skill also has some more notable abilities. By giving Otis load next turn and activating the passive ability of Shredder, it makes using 2 Dimension Shredders back to back fairly efficient as long as Otis can recover SP. With Otis running her Warp Captain ID and having 6 charge potency and 2 load, her second Dimension Shredder deals 174 damage to 4 neutral targets. At Red Spin 4, some of her multipliers and weight get inflated, resulting in 234 damage for her first Shredder and up to 296 damage for subsequent ones. The improvement is huge in comparison to her Red Spin 3 variant, so I would recommend upgrading Otis's Dimension Shredder if you have a lot of spare materials. Now that we've finished overviewing the damage category egos, let's rank them. I've jokingly disqualified Everlasting Faust, so she goes to the bottom spot. This ego is just too inconsistent and setup heavy to warrant a higher spot. At the 5th place I'm putting Force Mage Flame Ratio. The conditions for its damage up are slow and the overall damage doesn't exactly warrant this many turns of setup. The 4th place goes to Red Eyes Open Ratio. While having a far faster setup and envy typing, which is easier to support than Res in a lot of strong teams, this ego is slightly better than the last one in my eyes. Still, I wouldn't call it especially powerful. In the 3rd place we have Yisang's Dimension Shredder. Honestly, I'm convinced that I counted something wrong and it deals more damage than it should, based on how people swear by it. Still, the damage that this skill does is far from the first 2 spots. The silver medal of the damage category will be given to Otis's Dimension Shredder. She has great synergy in charge teams and works really well to deal a lot of damage to a group of targets. Her envy affinity also makes supporting this ego really simple and efficient. And at the top we have, of course, Contempt or Ratio. The damage this skill can reach with little to no support is incredible. Anytime you find yourself creating a long resonance chain, adding this ego will make the turn so much stronger. And yeah, the strongest ego of the character that specializes in damage dealing deals the most damage. Shocker. Now that we're done with the damage egos, let's move on to recovery. Recovery ego skills focus on healing your allies. Some of these skills heal HP, some heal SP. Usually SP healing is preferred, but having a good HP recovery ego can make the difference between a close victory and a devastating loss. To compete for the spot of the best recovery ego, I've picked out Faust's Fluid Sac, Mersault's Pursuance, Heathcliff's Yasunyata Tadrupam, and Ishmael's Blind Obsession. There are some other recovery egos, namely Rodion's Pursuance and Oris's Holiday, but I believe that Rodion's Pursuance is too similar to Mersault, while Holiday is competing for a spot against other strong egos, and loses to them quite a bit. Starting off we have Fluid Sac Faust, the GOAT, the OG, the first recovery ego in the game. Fluid Sac gets up to 24 power with 5 attack weight. At Threat Spin 3, this ego relies on 2 abilities to help Faust's teammates. After attack, Fluid Sac heals 15 SP and 15% HP for all allies including Faust. This effect is unconditional, powerful and targets the entire team. Healing Faust alongside her allies also effectively cuts down the sanity cost of Fluid Sac to 5. At Threat Spin 4, this skill receives another simple yet powerful ability. If the skill hits heads, all allies heal an additional 10 SP on top of the 15 SP healed beforehand. Not only does this make Faust an incredibly potent resource funnel to get this effect early, but it also makes the cost of this ego go into the negatives. After using Fluid Sac and hitting heads, Faust ends up gaining 5 SP instead of losing any. Next up we have Mersault's Pursuance. If Fluid Sac Faust is the engine that gets your team going, Pursuance is the safety net that saves you when you've gone too deep. Boasting a massive 34 max power, Pursuance easily outclashes everything your enemies can throw at you, allowing you to breathe when you can't keep up. This skill also has the ability to heal 2 allies with the lowest HP by 30% of Mersault's max HP and give them 2 protection. Considering that the healing is based off of Mersault's HP, the healing received by allies will be closer to 40% of their max HP, meaning that Pursuance is one of the fastest ways to bounce back after receiving a lot of damage. The third contender is Yasunyata Heathcliff. This ego toes the line between recovery and support with its 2 abilities. Yasunyata has 26 max power with an attack weight of 3, which can be improved to 5 by having Heathcliff at 15 SP. On hit, Yasunyata inflicts 2 power down, and after the attack, 4 allies outside of Heathcliff are healed for 25 SP. 25 SP is a great amount of sanity, and on this ego skill the recovery is entirely consistent. Compared to Fluid Sac, Yasunyata seems to trade health healing and self-sustenance for more consistent SP healing and a strong debuff. And the final and most expensive ego on this list is Blind Obsession Ishmael. This ego once again has more than just recovery going on, as it has a whole set of on-hit effects. Blind Obsession has a max power of 35 and an attack weight of 7. The healing of this ego is actually almost equal to Yasunyata, healing 25 SP for the 4 allies with the least SP. However, Blind Obsession is slightly better, considering that it also targets Ishmael herself. This means that you can reap the support benefits of this ego for just 10 sanity per usage, which expands its niche quite a bit. Now that we have all the recovery category egos figured out, let's rank them worst to best. Last place sadly goes to Pursuance Mersault. Even though this ego can be a lifesaver when push comes to shove, the other contestants simply create situations where you won't need to count on this ego to save you. In third place we have Yasonyata Tadrupam Heathcliff. Between the SP healing and the attack power down infliction, this ego is certainly effective and powerful, but the best two egos are simply better. The runner-up for the competition between recovery egos is, in a slightly unexpected turn of events, Blind Obsession Ishmael. This ego is pretty much a better version of Yasonyata. More power, more weight, stronger effect and a wider niche. Blind Obsession succeeds where Yasonyata fails, and that's why it's number 2. And the best recovery ego, in my opinion, is without a doubt Fluid Sac Faust. She has it all: convenient material cost, both SP and HP healing for the entire team, and enough weight and power to not be a pushover in terms of damage. Fluid Sac is the perfect tool whenever you want to kickstart an encounter, recover after multiple ego usages, or heal up when being chipped down. She's extremely versatile and very iconic, earning her a place in my heart and this video. With recovery egos out of the way, we move on to the final category of ego skills – support. These egos focus on debuffing enemies and buffing allies. They serve as great stepping stones towards crucial turning points in combat, and provide ample support in many different scenarios. There are a lot of egos that would fall in this category, but to compete for the spot of the best, I've picked out Sunshower Yi-Sang, Faust's Hexnail, Roshu's Red Eyes, Mersault's Chains of Others, Honglu's Cavernous Wailing, and Garden of Thorns Gregor. Let's start with Sunshower Yi-Sang. This ego has a max power of 27 and 5 attack weight. Before attack, this ego gives Yi-Sang's whole team a buff of 1 sloth power up and 2 sloth damage up, as well as 3 protection, for this turn and next turn. If the skill flips heads, Yi-Sang recovers 15 SP for every enemy hit by Sunshower. Due to the effect being applied before the attack, Sunshower actually benefits from its own buff, increasing its power to 28 and dealing 20% more damage. Additionally, the 2-turn duration of the effects, coupled with the chance at SP recovery, makes it possible to use 2 Sunshowers in a row, stacking the effects for 1 turn without paying the heavy sanity cost. When the effects are stacked, Sunshower actually becomes a fairly strong damage ego as well, performing exceptionally well against sloth-weak enemies. But the main reason for using Sunshower lies in its great effects extending to the entire team, as they are powerful on both offense and defense, allowing your team to deal a lot more sloth damage within 2 turns, or defend against unclashable mass attacks or gimmicky enemies with the team-wide protection. The ability to stack the effects makes the offensive effect even more powerful, as the first turn of buffs can be used for quickly staggering enemies, and the second and stronger turn can be utilized to deal insane amounts of damage. On defense, stacking protection rewards knowledge of the enemies and their attack patterns, but, as of right now, the only fight that benefits from this effect greatly is the Pequod Trio, as most other encounters don't need a 2-turn defensive setup to protect your team. Another notable thing about Sunshower is that the power of the skill is greatly increased by Threat Spin 4, giving Sunshower 2 more weight and 5 more coin power. This makes it even better at dealing damage against sloth-weak enemies, but it doesn't increase the potency of its supportive abilities. By the way, the corrosion variant of this ego is the perfect setup for Ring Yi-Sang's skill 3, but you have to pay a tremendous price for it and lose out on the chance at SP recovery. Next up we have a Season 1 support giant in Hexnail Faust. This ego skill has a max power of 26 and just 1 attack weight. On hit, it inflicts 3 Pierce Fragility and 1 Envy Fragility. If the skill flips heads, it also inflicts 3 Curse. As you could probably figure out, Hexnail is used to increase your team's damage by inflicting Pierce and Envy Fragility. It also inflicts Curse, which is a debuff that inflicts 1 attack power down, 1 defense power down, 2 offense level down or 2 defense level down for 3 turns. Curse serves as a strong yet inconsistent debuff that slightly weakens either the enemy's offense or defense, changing every turn. But let's circle back to the fragility. 3 Pierce fragility perfectly sets up pierce damage dealers, such as Ringy Sung, by essentially increasing their damage output by 30%. If the attack is not only pierce but also envy, it enjoys a 40% damage increase instead. For the low price of 6 envy materials, this ego is extremely spammable in envy teams, allowing for a lot of extra damage through both fragility and absolute resonance. This might seem like the extent of it, but I also want to take a look at the corrosion variant of Hex Nail. This skill is the other side of the coin, inflicting 3 envy fragility and 1 pierce fragility. And it also trades 2 of its total power to gain more consistency in both clashes and curse infliction. Corrosion Hex Nail slots even better into envy resonance, allowing for a guaranteed 30% damage increase for envy skills, the strongest of which are usually slash or blunt focused. The main drawback of this version is the higher resource cost. Due to overclock increasing the cost of ego by 50%, you have to pay 9 envy resources for 1 Hex Nail, which is expensive, but still manageable if you're running an envy focused team. I also have to mention that much like Sunshower, Hex Nail gains more offensive capabilities at Threat Spin 4, by dealing more damage against enemies with Curse. Combine that with the passive effect granted by this ego, and you can do up to double damage if all the conditions are met. Still, that damage will most likely be minuscule, so I don't really recommend threat spinning Hex Nail. The main problem of Hex Nail is that with only 1 turn of buffs, Faust really needs to go before her teammates, which is a difficult task for a character that never gets any haste. Our next support ego is Red Eyes Rosho. Note that I'm referring to the test level ego, not the HE level one. Red Eyes Rosho has a max power of 24, with the attack weight of 1. Before we go any further, I have to tell you that Threat Spin 4 gives Red Eyes 2 more weight, and I believe that this upgrade is worth the cost and should be picked up if you plan on using this ego. The 3 debuffs that Red Eyes inflict are Bind, plus coin drop, and slash fragility. Bind is used as a setup for the other 2 debuffs, considering that plus coin drop requires the target to have 3 bind, and slash fragility requires the enemy to be slower. Red Eyes Rosho can be used to actively cripple enemies with a lot of coins, and set up slash damage. She can set herself up to inflict the debuffs by using Red Eyes twice in a row, but she works best in teams that already inflict bind. For example, being played in charge alongside Captain Otis, Warp Rosho can opt to go for Red Eyes if she only has her first skill available, after Otis used her second skill last turn. Alternatively, you can use the passive provided by the skill to inflict bind by wearing clashes, which makes getting the full potential of Red Eyes pretty easy with smart play. The corrosion variant of the skill increases the plus coin drop to 2 and makes the slash fragility less consistent. This variant should be used whenever you're anticipating a powerful attack with a lot of coins next turn, as it will considerably lower its clash power by weakening all its coins. Next up we have the only base ego in this entire discussion, Mersault's Chains of Others, which is also known as Mersault Jail. Chains have a power of 22 and 1 attack weight. The effect of Mersault Jail is pretty simple. Both the target and Mersault himself are greatly crippled for 1 turn. On hit, both Mersault and the target are inflicted with 5 bind and 4 attack power down, while Mersault gains 2 protection on head's hit. This is already powerful, as when fighting against human bosses or bosses with few parts, chains effectively trade the power of 1/6 of your team's skills for the power of all enemy skills. By using Chains of Others on an enemy, Mersault allows his entire team to gain a great advantage over the enemy, and spamming this ego is not only easy due to its low resource and sanity cost, but also effective, as putting a boss in permanent Mersault Jail makes your victory inevitable. At Threat Spin 4, the protection becomes guaranteed on hit, and the debuffs inflicted to Mersault are weakened, meaning that you don't fully trade his power for the enemies, and even Mersault himself can enjoy a slight advantage against the target. The one flaw of the chains is that they make you lose tempo compared to other support egos, and can lead to slower victories, which is a problem in Refraction Railway. Next up we have Honglu's Cavernous Wailing. This ego is very different from the others in the support category, as it helps one team type specifically, and that is Tremor. Still, I feel like it's worth showing off here, as Cavernous Wailing single-handedly makes Tremor teams do formidable damage. This ego has a maximum power of 26, with 3 attack weight. It deals more damage against enemies with Tremor, and inflicts more Tremor potency and count, but we're here mainly for reverb. On hit, Cavernous Wailing inflicts amplitude conversion into Tremor reverb, which is a Tremor state that deals slow damage equal to the Tremor potency on target with every Tremor burst. Additionally, after using this skill, every time Honglu triggers Tremor burst, he inflicts 1 offense level down and 2 defense level down. This allows his team to gain an advantage when clashing with the inflicted enemies, further bolstering the performance of Cavernous Wailing as a support ego. Even though this ego only has an effect in one type of team, the damage it indirectly inflicts is far above what other egos on this list can do. With a good Tremor team, consistent infliction of Tremor count and potency allows your team to deal massive damage on bursts, which sets up Everlasting very well. Once again, this ego pretty much made Tremor useful on its own, and continues being incredibly powerful after the release of Time Moratorium and the many Tremor identities of the Time Killing Time subchapter. Last but not least, we have Garden of Thorns Gregor. While this ego isn't too liked in the wider Limbus Company community, I still want to take a look at it as a potent support tool. Garden of Thorns has 30 max power and 4 attack weight. The attack weight can be increased up to 6 by creating a resonance chain on the same turn that Garden of Thorns is used. In fact, all of this ego's abilities require you to fire off a resonance chain. On use, Garden of Thorns gives all allies 1 damage and 1 power up to the Sin affinity with the longest resonance. At 4 resonance he gives 1 more damage up, and at 5 resonance he gives 1 more power up. At Strat Spin 4 he also gains the ability to give these buffs for 1 more turn if the resonance is a 6 skill absolute resonance. As a bonus, Garden of Thorns Gregor heals up to 5 allies, based on resonance, for 18% of their max HP. Garden of Thorns works well as an additional support to a resonance chain that's already using an ego. When used alongside other buff egos such as Sun Shower, Hex Nail or Blind Obsession, the effects compound, giving the main damage dealers of the team a huge power increase for a turn. But the strongest effect of this ego comes when it's used within a last resonance chain with Contempt Awe. Making Garden of Thorns part of the chain makes getting the most out of it easier, and putting it before Contempt Awe allows you to double dip into resonance buffs with these 2 egos, dealing massive damage in the process. The main reason why this ego gets hate is because of Gregor himself. He lacks IDs that can easily slot into long resonance teams, without them losing strength. This problem is especially evident when you try to put Gregor into a last team to make use of the big combo, as the only 3-star identities of his that have last skills are G-Cop and Edgar, and with G-Cop being terrible, you're stuck with a sinking identity in a team that doesn't produce it. Well, that's all the support egos I find to be strong. Now let's rank them. For having a long setup and being placed on a character with a lot of great damage dealer identities, last place goes to Red Eyes Roshu. 5th place goes to Garden of Thorns Gregor. This ego is kind of slept on, but putting it into a team is a real challenge, considering the character it's tied to. 4th place goes to Cavernous Wailing Honglu. I wanted to put it higher, but the other egos can be used in a wider variety of teams, so this Tremor damage booster only gets 4th. The 3rd spot on the support list goes to Chains of Other's Mersault. It's been fun jailing bosses since release, and I don't think it will stop being efficient anytime soon. Still, it's not as good as the next 2. And Sunshower Yisang goes into 2nd place. You might be shocked by this, but I believe that the supportive value of this ego is less than that of the number 1, and the high power of Sunshower on offense is locked behind a pricey Red Spin 4. The high cost in both sanity and resources doesn't help this ego either. For the spot of the best support ego, I've chosen Hexnail Faust. Not only is the ego basically 2 skills in one, with the corrosion filling a different niche from the original, but it also is incredibly effective at bolstering a team's damage output for a very low price. And, well, that's all of them. To recap, I've chosen Contempt or Ryosho as the best damage ego, Fluid Sac Faust as the best recovery ego, and Hexnail Faust as the best support ego. If you disagree, you're free to leave a comment telling me that I'm wrong, and I will definitely read it and reply to it. If you enjoyed the video, or at least found it helpful, leave a like, and consider subscribing to join the Boss Here Before 1K club. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again. Goodbye.